Hello, thank you for watching this video. I thought I'd do some updates on my book and some of the responses I've had. My book is called Shakespeare's Authentic Performance Texts. There's a copy, you can get it at all outlets including Amazon and libraries and so on. It's been an interesting few months actually since the book was published, and I thought I'd use this video as an opportunity to deal with some criticisms, questions that I've had via email, and also update you on some of my other activities and further research. First thing I want to say is that thank you for those of you that have purchased the book, because it's been very, very successful, much more successful than I could have even imagined. I have 55 5-star reviews on USA, UK, Amazon, which is just brilliant, and the American Library Association's magazine Choice recommended the book, and I'll read what they said. They said it has insightful, in-depth analysis, a dizzying wealth of examples from the entire canon. Well, thank you very much, the people at Choice. Less flattering have been some quite prominent Shakespearean scholars stroke directors stroke people in places of power who I'm not going to mention on this video, but I will mention some of their points. And I had an email in it that said, "I'm not a first folio fundamentalist like you." Now, I should say that the book itself breaks down into three separate sections, really. One of the sections is about my personal experience of directing Shakespeare's plays, so therefore has exercises and the various stories and strategies within that. The second one is hitting the editors of Shakespeare's plays and the damage that they do to the plays. And the third one is working as a working practitioner from the first folio, the idea being that within the first folio there are acting clues which Hemmings and Condell, who compiled the first folio, left in, clues that Shakespeare was giving to his actors. So there's those first three things. The first one I mentioned, I don't think anybody cares about too much, although it's interesting. The second two things means that academia is under threat, because if we stop people editing these plays, they're out of a job. I'm sure you're aware, if you walk into any bookstore, you'll see hundreds upon hundreds of various editions of Shakespeare's plays. Now, they're called editors. In my view, they're not editors at all, they're adapters. They adapt the text. Now, if we assume that Hemmings and Condell, who'd worked with Shakespeare all their lives and were in the plays, some of the characters were written for them, printed what they knew to be true, where are these other volumes coming from? And there's a lot out there on the market. Let me give you a small indication of the damage that they do to the text. The second folio, for example, made 1,700 changes to the first folio, mainly to do with printing, and I deal with that, the differences in spelling and so on and so forth. I've charted quite in detail within my book. So 1,700 changes for 36 plays. The Riverside Shakespeare edition, which I'm sure you'll agree is a well-respected edition, makes 2,000 to 3,000 changes per play. So a conservative estimate, that's 72,000 changes to what Shakespeare wrote in the first folio. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm being called a fundamentalist. It seems to me that with their 72,000 plus changes to the plays, it's the editors, the editor adapters, who are taking a sledgehammer to Shakespeare's art, and not me and people like me. The second email that I received, and it's quite an interesting one actually, it says the role of the printers shouldn't be discarded. Well, within my book, the role of the printers hasn't been discarded. there's a whole chapter, chapter 3 in fact, which deals with the printers and the way that they worked and some of the mistakes that crept into the first folio. In fact, there's 14 times within the book where I mention quite extensively the printer errors and how they've crept in to sometimes productions, sometimes volumes of plays as they're published today. So no, the printers aren't discarded. The printers are there. You can read all about them in chapter 3. The third point, I think, from somebody else, in fact, is I've always felt the first folio to be a book created for readers and not actors. Well, in some ways, that is a good point, because Hemmings and Condell, in their introduction to the first folio, wrote two things about reading. They wrote to the great variety of our readers, and also, when they finish, they conclude with reading, therefore, again and again. But I think what we're doing here is misunderstanding the word reading. It isn't like it is today, where it's a private activity where you can go on the beach and or sit in a park for an hour or so, or just before you go to bed, read a book. We're talking here, I think, about public reading. Why do I say that, you ask? Well, let me show you. Here is a copy of the first folio. Well, it's not an actual first folio, because that would cost me millions and millions of pounds. This is a facsimile of the first folio, and let me tell you, it is heavy. Let me show you. Here's a page from Henry V, in fact, how it's laid out and so on. It isn't the sort of thing that you can, tuck in your doublet and go to the beach and read. It looks like a Bible, doesn't it? And it weighs like a Bible. You can imagine something of this size and weight being in a cathedral on a lectern somewhere, and then the archbishop or whoever would be reading, the holy words. This is exactly what that is. And let me tell you, I'm going to have to put it down, because that is heavy. Oh. So I think the idea would be is that when you read them, you'd read them out loud. Now, is there any evidence to apart from the weight of the book, to support that? Well, yes, there is. In 1607, there was a playwright called Edward Sharpham, who wrote a book called The Fleer. And in the introduction to that play, he wrote a preface that said, "To the reader and the hearer." So clearly, even though he was printing them to be read, he was expecting them also to be heard. The most popular and the most printed, in fact printed twice as much as any other play of the period, was an anonymous play called Musidorus. Now, Musidorus is interesting because within its printed pages, it includes a kind of cast breakdown for 10 people, and that breakdown says, person 1 will play this role, this role, and this role, person 2 this role, this role, and this role, and you wonder why was that included. In fact, in Musidorus, and I'm just reading it here, they said 10 persons may easily play it. But the thing about Musidorus and this kind of cast breakdown is the breakdown doesn't work. So clearly it did not come from a theatre company. It came from printers, readers, whoever's preparing the text, to tell the people at home that when you're reading it as part of a group, these are the lines of roles that you might play. The other final thing I'd like to say is that a couple of years ago I directed a play by Margaret Cavendish. Now, Margaret Cavendish wrote during the English interregnum, and none of her plays had ever been performed until I directed and produced the Unnatural Tragedy about 18 months ago. Now, what's interesting about Margaret Cavendish is that her plays were never performed, principally because she was a woman. Even though these plays were wonderful, they were never performed. And yet, when you look at the printed text, which by the way is only available at major libraries, it's not published anywhere else, but when you look at it, some of the things that are in the first folio, capital letters, italics, odd verse lineation, speech prefixes and so on, all follow closely the first folio, Shakespeare's first folio. Now, you wonder why. I mean, clearly she could have read the first folio, but we know that the family didn't own a copy. So where did she get that from then? Well, probably from her husband. Her husband, William Cavendish, was a patron of Ben Jonson. And in fact, Ben Jonson called him, after the king, my best patron. And Ben Jonson taught William Cavendish how to act, according to Margaret Cavendish. And from Jonson through to William Cavendish, through to Margaret Cavendish, it was then included as a performance clue during Margaret Cavendish's plays. Now, I could talk a lot about Margaret Cavendish, but we're here to talk about Shakespeare. I just want to tell you some things that I have coming up. On August the 18th, 2016, I'll be in Juneau, Alaska, giving a talk on my book to coincide with the visit of the Folio, first folio, to the State Library in Juneau, Alaska. So you have to be around in Alaska, pop along and see me. I'll be working with colleagues from Fairbanks Shakespeare Theatre to do some scenes across the week as well. In October, November, I'll be in Australia, working in Australia. And on February the 12th, 2017, my production of Othello, and as you may be aware, I edit all of my productions texts, Shakespeare texts, based on the first folio. I'll be in Hamburg for the opening of that. So look out for that. The 12th of February 2017, English Theatre of Hamburg, my production of Othello. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with me at any time, please go to my website, grahamwattsdirector.com. You'll find my email address and so on. I'm always happy to correspond with people, and more than happier to direct Shakespeare plays or do workshops or talks wherever they might be in the world. Thank you very much for your patience during this video, and I'll try to make another one when I see the real first folio, not that false one I was using, in August. Thank you.